Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be putting in 2 bamboo liners for some bamboo that I'm going to be planting at the back of my garden. But first of all, I'd like to just tell you about the site and what I've done here previously and why I'm going to be turning it into a bamboo kind of area at the back of my garden. So previously I actually had this as a vegetable plot. I had a no dig, no maintenance vegetable plot. I have done a video about it recently and I'll put a link in for that now if you want to see how I did that. But basically what I did is I just mulched everything with cardboard, and then I put mulch on top of the cardboard and then planted underneath the cardboard potatoes and Jerusalem artichokes. I then left them growing for a whole year, didn't do any weeding because it was well mulched, and I got a good harvest just now. So all I've done is I've not actually done any digging. I've got the spade and the fork out, but I've only used the rake. I raked off all the mulch, which is this here. This used to be cardboard and wood chips, but now it's just a lovely pile of compost. You can see here it's really nice compost now. It was just wood chips, but it's completely, or just about completely rotted down. So I'll be using that for my bamboo as a soil improver. This is all the harvest I've managed to get. 2 large buckets and basically 1 large bucket and a trug. So this is the ground that's been taken from. When I do a bit more digging I'll probably find a few more, but I just need to be aware they might start popping up once I've done the bamboo barrier. So the site here is actually really bad soil. There used to be a shed here years ago, and so there's a lot of rubble and rubbish and compacted soil, so digging out the bamboo barrier might be a little bit tricky. But the idea is I'm going to put this bamboo on the right here, going from around about here right along to the back, so I need bamboo barrier to contain that. This is a Phyllostachys edulis. This is also known as Moso bamboo. Now I've grown this from seed, and this is the first winter it's been outside, which is why it's not looking too happy at the moment. It's got a lot of leaf burn from the cold winds, but it did survive down to -6 in the pot this year, without any damage at all, so it looks like it should do well in my climate hopefully. But it doesn't do as well with the summers, so the winter hardiness, this should be fine. But summer heat is quite low here in Scotland. We don't have long hot summers, so this might struggle a little bit to really get going and grow quickly. So I need to improve the soil as much as possible, make sure I've got really rich soil so this does grow well. But you can see there's quite a few shoots coming up already, even though it's just the 1st of March today, and there's a lot more further down. You can see some tiny ones there and there. So this will shoot up nicely, and I think this will actually grow fairly well in my climate, even though it's not the ideal climate. I think with enough compost and feed it should do okay. So this will be going in this side. Now this is the, as I say, Phyllostachys edulis, one of the biggest hardy bamboos you can pretty much get. So this won't actually form much of a cover, but it'll be really tall. So I'll put it on this side because I don't really need to block anything on this side. But if you look up, there is a power line at the back, and I can't have this at the back, otherwise I'll be hitting the power line constantly, as it's the giant timber bamboo. So that's why that one's going on the side. Now the other bamboo that I'm putting at the back is a bit shorter. Now in theory it could reach the top of the power lines, but in my climate it's not too likely. I'd say they're probably about 8 meters in height, so it should be fine. If it does ever get that big, I will prune this. But this bamboo, although it's almost a timber bamboo, it is a Phyllostachys. It's a Phyllostachys aureosulcata, and the variety is Spectabilis. So this bamboo, it doesn't grow as big as the Phyllostachys edulis, and it has smaller canes, so it should have more of a screening effect. The Moso bamboo here on the right, this has a lot of bare stems at the base, so it's not great for screening unless you're screening objects higher up. Near the ground level they probably won't have any leaves when it's mature, whereas this Phyllostachys aureosulcata does have some more leaves lower down, so this will make a good screen at the back here. And it's quite a nice bamboo. The variety, as I say, is Spectabilis, and that means it has this kind of yellow with a green stripe coming up the side of the cane. Now it's not showing it too well at the moment because these bamboo canes aren't particularly large, but it should be bright yellow with a nice green stripe. It's showing it a bit on some of them, but it will become more pronounced as it matures. Another nice thing about this bamboo is the canes that go bright red when they're young, so you can see there. If it's in sunshine it goes bright red and then it goes more yellow. And then it also has strips of variegation on the leaves. You can see that one there. Every now and again you get a bit of variegation on some of the leaves, so it's quite a nice bamboo. That should do well in that corner. So both of these bamboos are from the Phyllostachys genus, so they are running bamboos. They can become invasive over time, so I need to be really careful with them, make sure I've got bamboo barrier. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be installing this bamboo barrier here. Now I think this is about 600 millimeters or 60 centimeters in depth. That's just about deep enough. Now what you want to do is get the biggest and thickest type of bamboo barrier that you can afford, especially if you've got some of the more aggressive Phyllostachys bamboos, because once they start running it's hard to stop them from running. They can easily go underneath patios and paving areas, so you really want to keep them contained if you can. One of the best ways to do that is to get some high density polyethylene, which is what this is. I've gone for the thicker variety. This is 2 millimeters thick. You can also get 1 millimeter thick or thinner, but 2 millimeter thick is a really good thickness, and that should hold most bamboos. Now there are other bamboo barriers which are more fabric typed. This is, I'd say, a solid bit of plastic. The fabric ones, I feel like they're probably fine for small bamboos, but with these giant timber bamboos, if you want to be safe, you should really try and get the hard plastic type instead of the fabric, because I think with the fabric, eventually the runners will just push through. They are pointy, the runners, and they can probably push through a fabric barrier eventually. So if you want to be safe, go for the biggest and thickest you can afford, and try and go for this kind of high density polyethylene with a really thick layer. So as I say, 2 millimeters is a good thickness, and try and go for as deep as possible. Obviously the deeper you go for, the less likely the runners are going to escape, but it's a lot more work with digging. So with the runners, they shouldn't really go much more than a foot deep. So this is, as you can see, is twice as deep as what I'd imagine the runners would ever go. So this should be absolutely fine. And I'll show you some of the runners on my Phyllostachys aureosulcata, because this one actually shows it quite nicely. A few of these actually came out of the pot last autumn and started to sprout. So you can see here, this is what the runner looks like. It's basically just like a stem that runs just underneath the surface of the ground, and it has that kind of sharp point on the end of it, and that's what can push through concrete and lots of other materials. You can get away with concrete sometimes if it's quite thick concrete, but if there's any cracks in it, there is a chance this could push through. So ideally you would go for some kind of high density plastic that can handle that. So I'll show you here now on the side so you can have an idea of what the runners look like. You can see they do come down. This one, probably because it was in a pot, it did actually come right down about 20 centimeters in depth. You can see it runs around there and then it comes up. Normally the runners run horizontally, and then you'll get the culms or the canes coming up directly from them. Sometimes you might get a runner that comes to the end and then sticks up like this one, and that can also become a cane, but often the canes are actually formed from further down on the horizontal runners. So these are the things that are the biggest problem. Now the roots themselves in the bamboo, the roots can go much deeper. They could go up to 2 meters deep, but the roots don't actually make any more shoots, and the roots don't normally cause any damage whatsoever. It's the runners that cause the damage, and it's the new shoots pushing up through houses or through concrete that causes the damage. So as long as you can keep the runners contained, you don't have to worry too much about the roots. So these roots will come out the bottom of my bamboo barrier, and they will spread quite far, but they won't cause any damage because they'll be really deep underground. It's the canes and the runners that cause the problem, and they'll stay right up in the surface. So what I'm going to do now is start marking out where I'm going to dig out the ground for putting in the bamboo barrier here. It will be quite a difficult job. There's going to be a lot of digging. What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the topsoil from the subsoil. So the topsoil is where all your most nutrients are in the soil, and it's the first layer of the soil. You want to keep that on the top. The subsoil, you should notice when you dig further down that you'll find some poorer looking soil. That should be kept at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is, there's a lot of stones in my garden, and I'm just going to keep them to the side. Once I dug out the trench where these bamboos are going to be growing, I'm then going to line it with subsoil and rocks. What that would do is it will encourage the rhizomes to stay near the surface and not go too deep. Now they should be absolutely fine with this kind of barrier. There is a slight risk. Normally they would be in the first 20-30 centimeters of soil, but when it hits the barrier, the rhizome can sometimes go down and go a bit deeper. So you want to make sure there's something hard underneath if you can, just to try and prevent that. And the other thing you'll do, which I'll show later once I've put the rhizome barrier in the ground, is you want to angle it. So if it was angled, say this way, the bamboo shoot would come in. It's more likely to go down. You don't want that because that will cause it to go deeper and it might go under the barrier. So you want to angle your barrier like this, so when it hits it, it's more likely to go up instead of down, and that will give you much more protection. And you also want to have your barrier about 5-10 centimeters above the ground, just to stop any canes that try and come up and over the barrier, which is a problem that can occur. It shouldn't be a big problem for me because I can always see that happening and cut it off. So what I'm going to do now is start digging this out. I'll come back to you once I've made some good progress. I'm going to start with this side here. The back side there's a lot more rubbish, and there's also a lot of clay, so it's going to be quite wet soil. We had a lot of rain recently, so I'll just work with the sandier soil here. I need to lift up a slab there because I'm going to have the bed just right up to the slabs. So instead of having this section of paving 2 slabs wide, I'm going to narrow it to 1 slab wide. I'll have a nice strip along here, and when you are making your bamboo barrier bed, you want to make sure it's as big as possible. The bigger it is, the bigger your bamboo will become. If you give it a really small space, you'll never get a giant sized bamboo. So if you're growing a small bamboo, or one that doesn't get too big, it doesn't matter if you don't give it a huge amount of space. But if you want to get those really big giant canes, you really need to let your bamboo have as much space as possible. So that's why I've gone for 10-meter rolls. I've got 2 of these, so each bamboo will have 10 meters of bamboo barrier containing it, so they'll have a decent amount of space to grow. And what I'll be doing is I'll be having 2 separate beds, because I don't want these to intermix and start spreading around. So I don't want this congested one coming around here and weakening the giant timber bamboo. I don't want the giant timber bamboo coming round to this other bed and then causing problems with getting close to the power cables up above. So that's why I'm keeping them in 2 separate beds. And the other reason is I don't know which out of the 2 of these is the most vigorous. There's a chance that if one's much stronger than the other, it could outcompete the other bamboo, and then one bamboo would take over, and I'd only have 1 variety instead of 2 varieties of bamboo. So in order to start digging out the trench for the root barrier here, what I need to do is make sure I know exactly how long the rhizome barrier is. So what I'm going to do is, I know this is 10 meters long, or at least that's what I've ordered. It needs to be about a 9-meter trench in the complete circumference of it, so that this can have some overlap. It's very important that I have a really good overlap with this, so that the roots can't come in between the gap where the 2 sections meet and push through. So what I'll be doing is I'll just be getting a piece of rope, basically measuring it to about 9 meters, draping it along this bed, and that'll be my guide when I'm digging. So it's the next day, and I'd like to show you the progress I made in day 1. Now unfortunately there's a lot of material under here which is making it really hard to dig. There used to be an old shed here, and I think before they put the shed there, they just used it as a dumping ground for rubbish, and they just put all the stones and rubbish that they had in the garden underneath the shed and used it as a bit of a foundation. So there's lots of like old bits of felt from the shed roof here. There's also a lot of plastic as well, quite a few stones. You can see there's some larger ones there, and unfortunately there is a massive stone over here as well. So what I've been doing is I've skimmed off the topsoil. That's all in this bag now. I would expect the topsoil to be deeper. Normally in my garden it's about 15 to 20 centimeters deep. Here unfortunately it seems to be 5 centimeters of topsoil, and then it's just basically loads of stones, about 20 centimeters deep of rubble, which they've probably used as a solid foundation. And then underneath that layer of stone it is just kind of like a silty, almost like a loam. And normally the rest of my garden's quite sandy and full of stones, but underneath that, the first layer of stones that they've used as a foundation is actually decent soil. So with the spade I can show you here, it's just all completely solid. It's all stones, the whole lot. There is a trench along the side where there wasn't any foundations for the shed. That's fine. And the most surprising thing was, these I thought were normal slabs, but they're not. They're actually cast in situ on top of this plastic. I had to peel the plastic off the bottom of the concrete because it was cast onto that, and because it's cast concrete, it's actually a lot thicker than a normal slab, and it's uneven. So you can see there, it is actually really thick. It's almost, in some places, you can see with this one over here, this one was smaller, so it was easier to move, but in some places it was actually almost twice as thick as a normal slab, so definitely quite difficult to move. This one I'm going to have to move at some point, but it's probably about twice as heavy as a normal 3x2. And underneath that there's actually this layer here, which is actually a layer of like asphalt or tarmac. I don't know why that's under here. And underneath the layer of tarmac it's that compacted layer of stones. So on the edge it is quite thin, only a couple of centimeters, but I'm going to have to get my pickaxe and smash through all this tarmac and find somewhere to dispose of that before I can continue digging. I did do an exploratory hole to see what was underneath, and as I say, the layer of stones, and then it's just normal soil underneath. So what I'm going to do is dig out the layer of stones, set it aside as topsoil because it's near the surface. It probably is similar to topsoil. I'm just going to separate all the stones, because if there's loads of stones the bamboo is going to struggle to grow through it. And then I'm going to put this topsoil back on, mix it in with this compost and also some feed, which I'll talk about later on in the video, and then I'll refill. And the only thing of interest I found so far is one coin. Hasn't got any value unfortunately, but it is a bit weird that it's here. It seems to be a Danish coin from 1970. No idea why there's a Danish coin in Scotland, but presumably the last owner had gone to Denmark on holiday at some point, and yeah, so that's the only thing of interest so far. I'll let you know if there's anything else interesting that comes up in this dig. That's going to be a huge more work than I was expecting, especially as I'm going to have to get a pickaxe and smash through that layer of tarmac. And even the rest of it, which isn't tarmacked, I can't dig it with my spade. It needs the pickaxe. I did use the matic on this section just to dig out that, so I'll definitely need a pickaxe or my matic to smash through all these stones, because a normal spade won't cut it. So I thought I could dig this out in one day. I think it's going to take me several days to dig out all the stones and separate them from the soil, and then I'll get back to you in a few days' time and we'll see how much progress I've made. So it's now the next day. I did manage to make a reasonable amount of progress yesterday. Now, the amount of stones, I was quite underestimated how much stones there would be. A huge amount. You can see this is all the rubbish that came out of it, so quite a lot of plastic, a tiny bit of asbestos, so I need to dispose of that properly, and also a lot of asphalt as well, or tarmac, and a few bits of metal, and also an old measuring tape that was plastic, so it didn't corrode. I found all these stones as well, particularly large one there, some bits of concrete, and that other pile of stones, and that is a huge amount of stones considering that's the only section I've done, and I've only done the first foot. I haven't dug any deeper. Massive amount of stones, wasn't expecting that, so it did take a lot longer than I had expected, but it should be a lot easier going forward now. So I've dug a hole just to really see what the soil is like underneath, and around this side I can actually show you what the whole area was like. You can see the top layer, it's just like a course of stones, so I think they've just laid this as a foundation for the shed, and on top of that, at that end, was also the tarmac. So about 20 centimetres or a foot or so, maybe 30 centimetres of stones that I had to dig through, so I really had to use a matic and a pickaxe to get through that. And then looking down here, I think looking at the site of my house, there's like a hill above my house and a hill below it, so that it kind of slopes down, and it's flat actually where my property is. So I think this has actually been levelled and raised slightly. So in the front garden, for example, I've only got about 20 centimetres of topsoil, and then it tends to go down to the more like the subsoil. Down at this section, there doesn't really seem to be much differentiation between topsoil and subsoil. And to be honest, I've got about 3 foot, or 2 or 3 foot anyway, of this kind of nice loamy soil. So again, it's quite different to my front garden. There's quite a bit of clay in here. You can see it's kind of holding together in lumps. It's not a clay soil, but it's certainly not sandy. It's not as sandy as the front garden. Front garden is extremely sandy. Here, there's quite a bit of clay and stuff mixed in, so it's actually going to be quite good soil once I enrich it. But at the moment, it's pretty terrible soil. There's basically no organic matter, and there's no worms or any kind of life in here at the moment, so definitely need to improve the soil. But there's a good depth to it anyway, and at the bottom you can just maybe about see a bit of sandy material. It's kind of hard to dig down there at the moment, it's so deep. But basically what I've hit there is the subsoil, and in my area what it is it's glacial deposits and coastal deposits. I'm kind of in between the coast and the glacial deposits from the Cairngorms, so I get a lot of granite. Basically all these stones are glacially deposited granite, and down there it's just pure sand, almost like sand from a sand pit, with loads and loads of stones. So that's completely solid. I'm really happy that's about the depth of the root barrier, because it means that the rhizomes really won't be able to escape underneath. It's really solid. I mean, the barrier is deep enough anyway that they shouldn't escape underneath, but the 1 in a million chance that they do, I have got a really solid base there of compacted stones and sand that they're not going to get through, and the roots will stay quite near the surface as well. So it might be a bit susceptible in drought because I've only got about 2 or 3 foot where the roots are probably going to grow. I doubt many roots are going to grow into that compacted layer, so I need to make sure I keep this well watered, but otherwise it should make for a really good bed. So as I say, the soil is pretty bad quality at the moment, not any life in it, no organic matter. So what I'm going to do is dig in a lot of this composted material. This is free, so that's great. I'm just going to dig that into the soil. I'm also going to dig in a lot of slow release fertilizer, so blood, fish and bone, to give it the nutrition that it needs, because the compost itself doesn't have a huge amount of nutrition, apart from maybe phosphorus and a bit of potassium. That has basically no nitrogen, and being a grass, bamboo likes a lot of nitrogen, so I need to add blood, fish and bone for that, but it will also add a bit more phosphorus and potassium, because although this is really nice compost, let's say it's low in nutrition, it's more just helping with the structure of the soil and feeding the microorganisms than actually feeding the plant. So that needs to be dug in. That'll make this into a really rich topsoil with the blood, fish and bone. And I'm also going to put a little bit of wood ash from my parents' garden, because the soil here is quite acidic. I just want to bring it a bit more to the neutral range, because that'll be better for the bamboo. And also there's a lot of phosphorus and calcium in the wood ash, so that will also help with the bamboo's growth. So what I'm going to do now is dig this whole lot over. I'm not going to dig it too deep, because I don't want to encourage the rhizomes to go too deep. So I'm only going to do it about a foot in depth of really good rich soil. And I'm going to be, or maybe just over a foot, I'm going to be incorporating that compost and feed, and then taking out any excess stones. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be digging the trench ready for the bamboo barrier. So I'll just stand back here again to show you how many stones there were, and there's going to be quite a few more coming out of there once I dig it over. I've only gone over that once with the matic. There's probably going to be not this much again, but definitely a decent amount of stones still to be taken out. And then hopefully with this back section, this should be a lot easier, because this is where I'm going to put the other bamboo barrier. It's going to be thinner and it's going to be longer. And the back section here, there was actually the layer of stones. It only goes up to about 20 centimeters away from the fence at that side, but at the back it's more about 40 or 50 centimeters around about this layer here. So coming along, there shouldn't be too much in the way of stones in this back section. And hopefully once we get to about this point, because I think the old shed didn't go much further than around about where this grass starts, this area over here hopefully won't have any major stones. And I have dug in this area in the past, and that wasn't too bad for stones, so hopefully the next bamboo barrier will be a lot easier to dig out. So that's the trench now mostly dug out. As you can see, there's a bit more stones. It wasn't too bad when it comes to stones, but there's a lot of soil I had to dig out. What we've done, we've separated the topsoil and the subsoil. So the topsoil is in the bulk bag, subsoil is separate. We don't want to mix the two together, because we want to make sure that it's growing in a nice rich soil environment. So this is the barrier. Now we do need to dig it a little bit deeper. We've just unrolled it to check how deep it is at the moment. It needs to be another 5 centimeters deep or so. Towards this end down here, it's not too far off, and it does need to be slightly higher than the actual edge of the soil to stop any bamboo rhizomes coming up and over the bamboo barrier. And there's a good amount of overlap, probably more overlap than I'd need, but at least we've got plenty of overlap. That should really help to stop any rhizomes from escaping. And I'll make sure the overlap section is this bit here, than this kind of area, because if any rhizomes escape, I want them to escape in my garden where I can control them and not go off underneath the neighbour's garden, so that I can make sure they're well controlled. And what we will be doing is I'll be drilling holes through this at the point where it meets, and I'll be bolting it together very tightly with stainless steel bolts. That will stop any rhizomes from pushing through. If you just overlap it, there's a risk that the rhizome will creep along the edge and push its way through, but with bolting it together really tightly with stainless steel bolts, it won't be able to come through. And it's also important that I'm using stainless steel that has a high corrosion resistance, because that needs to last for decades, if not 100 years. So I need to make sure that the bolts don't corrode, because if it was just normal steel it would rust eventually, and then it would just break and then the bamboo could get out. So there's a bit more digging to do, as I say, not too much more. What I also need to make sure that we do is we angle the bamboo barrier. So basically it needs to be angled like that. I think I talked about it earlier in the video. So when the rhizomes come, it gets pushed up and not down, so that it doesn't go underneath the barrier. It's just encouraged to come up and over the barrier where I can see it, and then I can cut it. So we need to angle this, we need to get it bolted together. But first of all, we need to dig this a good 5-10 centimeters deeper, and there will be a slight raised bit. What I might do is I might fill up the insides just slightly higher. This is 2mm thick, high density polyethylene plastic, so it's very strong, and I can actually probably use this as a slightly raised bed. So I'll probably have it raised about 5-10 centimeters higher than the external soil. That will help in a couple of ways. One, it will heat up faster in spring. Two, it will be slightly higher than the surrounding soil. It means I don't have to dig the barrier quite as deep, which will make my life a little bit easier, because at the moment we're getting a little bit short of space for all this excess soil. So that's the plan for now. I'll probably see you guys towards the end of the video where we've got this planted up. And the weird thing is we've done all this groundwork and all this material has been excavated, but once it's actually planted up, it won't actually look much different to when we actually started. It will just have a little bit of plastic sticking out of the ground and a small bamboo plant in there. So that's the first bamboo barrier put in and fully planted up. So yeah, as you can see, we managed to get rid of quite a few of the stones. What I did is, once I dug the trough for the bamboo barrier, I put the bamboo barrier in and then lined it with lots of stones on the bottom. That was a good way to get rid of some of the stones, but also it will just discourage the bamboo rhizomes from trying to grow underneath the barrier and escape, because the layer of stones will just act as a slight barrier. But as I say, the barrier should be deep enough that that won't be a problem anyway. So we overlapped it by about 2 meters of overlap. Probably didn't need as much overlap as that, but the amount of bamboo barrier I had was a bit longer than I'd calculated, so we had a bit excess, so we just overlapped it to save it. And the way it can come out, if there's any chance at all, which I don't think there will be only from this section here. So it's well in my garden. I can control any rhizomes that do escape. The overlap actually starts over here, and it's kind of hard to sew the way it's wrapped up, but it's bolted together with lots of bolts on the edge here, and we put the join on the corner so it's on the inside. So this plastic is actually pushing incredibly hard against the other plastic, and it's almost impossible for the rhizomes to actually push through there. And if it does, it then comes up against some stainless steel bolts which are clamping it down really hard. Any chance it comes through that, it has to spiral around the whole section here, and then it will come out the end there. So it's pretty much impossible for the bamboo to escape now, especially as that section down there is clamped down so tight. So I filled up with soil, then planted this Moso bamboo right in the middle, so spread out in all directions, and then I've covered it with a mulch of wood chips just to keep the soil damp and stop it drying out too quick. And also the wood chips will stop the weeds from growing, which can compete with the bamboo, and as it rots down over time, it should add to the bed and improve the soil quality. So at the moment it does look a bit odd where it's quite high above the ground in some places, especially on the left. This is actually level, but the ground is slightly sloped, so that's why this end of the far side looks so much higher. What I might do is, when I put the other bamboo barrier in, I might put some wooden edging at the edge and then just raise it with mulch or something, just to make it look a bit more in keeping. I do want it about 5 or 10 centimeters above the ground level, so it's like a slight raised bed, but I don't want it too high, so that area I will raise slightly. I'll just level the ground a little bit just to make it look a bit more natural and a bit less raised at that side. But otherwise that's about it for this bed. That's it fully finished. I'll just give it a really good watering now, and we should have some really good growth over the summer, hopefully. There is a lot of new shoots that are starting to form. With Moso bamboo, they do start sprouting really quite early in the season, and there is the risk, because I'm in the cold part of the world, that they might get hit by the frost. So what I've done is I've buried it just a little bit deeper than it was in the pot, and I've mulched it with wood chips as well. So at the moment, if there is a hard frost, the shoots are actually protected. It should be okay, but we'll see going forward how it does. There is a chance that if we get a late frost, it could get damaged. But I'm hoping that this will spread nicely in this bed and completely fill it within 2 or 3 years. So the next stage now is to continue and plant up the rest of the bed. So I've got my aureosulcata bamboo here, which needs planted, so that will be the next job. I'll need to dig out this back bed. It will be a lot thinner, a lot longer, probably go around to about here in length, so it'll be quite a long, thin bed. And I'll just have to pay close attention to where I'm putting the foundations for my shed, because the shed foundations will be right next to the bamboo barrier. What I might actually do is move my shed plans slightly further forward, just give me a little bit more space at the back, because I've got a bit of garden that I can afford to lose on the other side, so it might actually make sense for me just to move the shed slightly further away from the boundary fence. That gives me a bit more space for the bamboo, also some more space for my trees here, which I want to harvest apples and the plums off of that. So it might be a good idea to just give myself a bit more than a metre of space at the back, lose a bit of garden on the other side, just so it's a bit easier to put the bamboo barrier in and gives me a bit more growing space. So I'll go ahead, start with that. And the digging wise, it shouldn't be as hard as the last one. There should be a lot less stones, because this area there isn't much of the shed foundations underneath here, so it should be a lot more straightforward. So I won't give as many updates, but I'll show you it when it's half completed, and then probably at the end when it's fully planted up. So I've now dug out the second bamboo bed. as you can see, there is a huge amount of soil that comes out of the trench when you dig it out. So I'll come around here now and show you how the bed was. Now fortunately there was actually very few stones. I probably only found a total of 5 or 10 stones, I think, compared with the other bed which probably had over 100. So it was much easier going, a lot easier to dig. The only issue I have now is they used to have a pear tree right here. Now I don't like removing trees, but the pear tree was in the wrong place really. It's in Scotland, it's not a south-facing position, and so to get pears to germinate and have nice tasting pears is pretty difficult in Scotland anyway, and as it wasn't a south-facing wall, it really wasn't going to come to much. So I got rid of the pear tree, but I do have some of the deeper roots that still survive. So you can see down here there are some quite substantial roots. I'll need to get the mattock out on that and dig them out. There's also a few other roots from down there. Now I presume that's also the pear, because there's no other large trees in this area really, so that's probably some more of the old pear tree. So I'll remove those roots, remove these with the mattock as well. Otherwise the rest of the trench is just about the right depth, and this area needs to be dug a bit deeper once those roots are gone. I'll then refill it with the stones at the bottom so it creates a nice bed to stop the rhizomes coming through. I'll then fill it up with the subsoil, which is here, and then I've got the topsoil there, which I'll then mix in with some of the compost as well to enhance the soil. And I'll just be using the similar kind of feed thing with blood, fish and bone and wood ash. So this one is slightly different because it's thinner. I didn't leave a bit in the middle because it was too narrow. I just basically dug out the entire bed, so that's probably why there's a bit more material than there was with the original one, even though the bed is a similar size. It's because I've not left that central area. So a bit more digging out to do, and then I'll show you it once it's all planted up. And as I say, it's that slightly larger bamboo that I'm putting in here, the Phyllostachys aureosulcata. So a larger plant to begin with, but in the end it will actually be smaller than the edulis over there. So that's the 2 bamboos now planted up. As you can see, I've actually started the foundations for my shed, which I'll put a link in when that video finally comes up. So there's a lot of earth moving now, but over here we've got the 2 bamboos planted up. This one here was a lot easier, there was a lot less stones to worry about. The bark looks quite high at the moment, but I've only just put the bark on, that will sink. As you can see with this one I planted up earlier, when I showed you the update earlier in the video, the bark was much higher, and that's also sunk. So I'll probably top that up with more bark at a later stage when I get a bit more bark in. But that's this one now planted up, the Phyllostachys aureosulcata Spectabilis. It's looking quite good already. In fact, a lot of the shoots that came up last autumn, they got hit by the frost, they lost all their leaves. They're actually starting to resprout now, lots of new leaves. We've had some slightly warmer weather, and so this one's actually starting to sprout and looking quite good. The Phyllostachys edulis or Moso bamboo, that hasn't really done anything yet. There's 2 young shoots which are just starting to come up, but they're not really growing much, and there's not really much sign of new leaves coming on it, but I'm not too worried about that. It's March, it's far too early for it to grow. I'd actually be worried if it was putting up new shoots, because they would actually be killed by the frost now. So I'll probably give you guys an update on these bamboos later in the year. Hopefully by then the shed's done and all the groundwork has been finished. So as you can see, there's some areas that are quite high. This whole ground area needs to be leveled and standardized, because it's all different heights at the moment, which is why the barrier looks so odd, because the barrier is mostly the same height all around. It's just the ground is very undulating. So once I get the shed done, we've got all this excess soil as well that I need to fill back in, get the soil levels done. This will look quite nice. So I'll see you guys probably later in summer when these are shooting up. We'll see how much growth they put on. This one did really well last year. I'm not sure how big it will grow this year, because the small ones that should have come up this spring came up in autumn, so I feel like it's used up a lot of its energy that it would have used this year. But we'll see how it does. You never know, this might grow some tall canes taller than the ones it had last year. If it is happy, it should double in size every year. And we'll see how the Moso bamboo does. I'm quite hopeful for that. When I looked at the roots, there was decent sized shoots starting to grow, so I'm hoping that will at least double in size, and we'll see how big it grows. As I say, the climate isn't ideal for it, but we'll just have to see how it does. So I'll finish the video here because it's already becoming quite long, but I'll give you guys an update later in the year when the plants are fully grown after their initial spring flush, and I'll leave you with some photos now of what they look like at the moment with the new shoots just starting to come up in spring.